Imagine standing in the bustling market square of Nuremberg in the year 1495. The air is filled with the cacophony of commerce, the shouting of fishmongers, the bleating of sheep, the ringing of church bells. The city is a masterpiece of medieval civilization, a place of order, piety, and prosperity. But then, a hush falls over the crowd. The noise dies down, replaced by a tense, fearful silence. A path clears through the throng, not out of respect, but out of revulsion. A man walks through the center of the square. He is dressed distinctively, perhaps wearing a cloak of a specific color, yellow or red, mandated by law to mark him apart. He does not make eye contact. He does not speak. He approaches a stall selling bread. He does not reach out with his hand. Instead, he lifts a small white wand and points to a loaf. The baker, careful not to touch the man's fingers, slides the bread across the counter and drops the coin he receives into a bowl of vinegar to purify it. This man is the Scharfrichter, the executioner. He is the physical embodiment of the law, the arm of the state, the final arbiter of justice. Without him, society would collapse into anarchy. Yet, to the people of Nuremberg, he is a monster. He is unehrlich dishonorable. His touch is poison. His breath is contagion. His very shadow is believed to bring bad luck. He is a man who lives in a paradox so cruel it is almost impossible for the modern mind to comprehend. He is essential, yet he is exiled. He is the protector of the peace, yet he is treated as an enemy of the people. This documentary will take you beyond the scaffold and the axe. We will not just look at the gory details of beheadings and burnings. We will look at the man holding the blade. We will enter his home, isolated on the edge of town where the winds carry the stench of death. We will sit at his table, where his children learn that they have no future beyond the gallows. We will stand with him outside the church door, listening to the muffled prayers he is forbidden to join. This is the story of the medieval executioner, a man trapped in a prison without bars, a soul condemned by the very society he served. It is a story of superstition, fear, and the terrifying loneliness of being the one who does the dirty work of civilization. To understand the executioner's plight, we must first understand the medieval concept of honor. In the Holy Roman Empire and much of Europe, society was stratified not just by wealth, but by spiritual and social purity. Certain professions were considered dishonorable because they dealt with filth or death tanners, knackers, grave diggers. But the executioner occupied a unique category of shame. He dealt with the ultimate taboo, the shedding of human blood. Even though his actions were sanctioned by the king and blessed by the courts, the act of killing was seen as a stain on the soul that could not be washed away. This stain was not metaphorical. It was treated as a physical contagion. This is why the executioner's home was almost always located extramuros outside the walls. In a time when the city wall was the boundary between civilization and chaos, being forced to live outside was a powerful statement of exclusion. He often lived near the knackers' yards, where dead horses were rendered into glue, or near the leper colonies. The geography of his life was defined by the waste products of society. His neighbors were the dead, the diseased, and the damned. In cities like Paris, the executioner's house was known as the Maison du Bourreau. It was a place of dread. Superstitions swirled around it like fog. It was whispered that the executioner practiced dark magic, that he harvested body parts for spells, a rumor fueled by the fact that executioners were often skilled in medicine, setting bones and treating wounds, a side hustle born of their anatomical knowledge. But this medical skill only deepened the suspicion. He was a man who knew the body too well, who knew exactly how much pain a person could endure before dying. This knowledge made him useful, but it also made him terrifying. He was a healer and a killer, a duality that the medieval mind struggled to reconcile. The exclusion extended into the most sacred realm of medieval life, the church. In an age where life was short and eternity was forever, the salvation of the soul was the primary concern of every human being. For the executioner, this salvation was always in doubt. The church was deeply ambivalent about his role. On one hand, theologians like Thomas Aquinas argued that the executioner was the sword of God punishing sin. On the other hand, local priests often viewed him with disgust. He was frequently barred from entering the main nave of the church. He had to stand in the back or in a special segregated area, sometimes behind a screen, so the good Christians wouldn't have to look at him during Mass. The Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, was often denied to him, or given only after everyone else had been served. Confession, the mechanism for absolving sin, was a logistical nightmare. Some priests refused to hear his confession at all, fearing that his blood guilt would contaminate them. Others would hear it only outside the church, in the open air. Imagine the psychological weight of this. You are a man who kills for a living. You see the fear in the eyes of the condemned every day. You hear their screams. You need spiritual comfort more than anyone. Yet, the very institution designed to offer forgiveness turns its back on you. You are told that your job is God's will, but you are treated as if you are the devil's agent. This spiritual quarantine continued even after death. The ultimate fear for a medieval person was to be buried in unconsecrated ground, cut off from the community of the faithful on Judgment Day. For many executioners, this was their fate. They were denied burial in the churchyard. Their bodies were interred in the potter's field, alongside suicides, unbaptized infants, and the very criminals they had executed. It was a final, eternal insult. It said that even in death, the executioner did not belong to the community of the saved. He was an outcast forever, his bones mingling with the outlaws he had dispatched. But the curse of the executioner did not end with him. It was a genetic stain passed down to his children. In the rigid hierarchy of medieval guilds, the son of an executioner had almost zero chance of becoming a carpenter, a blacksmith, or a merchant. No master would take him as an apprentice. No guild would accept his membership. The logic was cruel but consistent. If the father is polluted, the son is polluted. To share a meal or a workspace with the son of a hangman was to risk one's own social standing. This created a hereditary caste of executioners. Dynasties were formed, not out of pride, but out of necessity. The Sanson family in France, the Pierrepoints in England, the Schmidts in Germany, these families held the office for generations because they had no other choice. A father would train his son in the grim arts of the trade: how to tie a noose, how to sharpen a sword, how to break a man on the wheel without killing him instantly. It was a dark inheritance. Imagine being a young boy, watching your father work, knowing that the axe in his hand will one day be in yours, that the hatred directed at him will one day be directed at you. Marriage was another closed door. No respectable family would marry their daughter to an executioner. It was social suicide. So, executioners married the daughters of other executioners. They formed a tight-knit, inter-regional network of pariah families. They traveled to each other's weddings, often the only social gatherings where they could let their guard down, where they weren't judged. In these gatherings, a strange counterculture emerged. They were wealthy, executioners, were paid well, and often had the right to the clothes of the victim, but they were socially dead. They wore fine clothes, threw lavish parties, and lived in comfortable houses. But they lived in a gilded cage of isolation. Let us return to the marketplace, the economic heart of the city. The restrictions placed on the executioner here reveal the depth of the touch taboo. In many towns, laws were explicitly written to govern how the executioner shopped. In Memmingen, for example, the executioner was the last person allowed to enter the market after the citizens had finished. He could only buy the leftovers. In other places, the pointing stick rule was strictly enforced. The fear was that if an executioner touched a cabbage or a piece of meat and then didn't buy it, no one else would buy it either. It was considered tainted. This extended to social interactions in taverns. If an executioner entered a pub, silence would descend. He would often have his own designated mug, sometimes chained to the wall, so no one else would accidentally use it. If he sat at a table, no one would sit with him. If he tried to join a game of dice, the game would end. He was a ghost at the feast, present but separated by an invisible barrier of dread. This daily grinding humiliation was perhaps worse than the dramatic exclusion from the church. It was a constant reminder, in 1,000 small interactions, that he was not one of us. And yet, society needed him. When a sewer was blocked, the executioner was called to clear it. When a stray dog needed to be killed, the executioner was summoned. When a brothel needed to be taxed or regulated, the executioner was often the enforcer. He was the master of high works executions and the master of low works waste management. By dumping all the unpleasant tasks of the city onto one man, the citizens could feel clean. He became the sign eater of the medieval city, absorbing all the filth, physical and moral, so that the good burghers could remain pure. The psychological toll of this existence is documented in the journals and memoirs that some executioners left behind. The most famous is that of Franz Schmidt, the executioner of Nuremberg in the late 16th century. His diary is a stunning document of humanity in the face of inhumanity. Franz was a sober, serious man who viewed his work not with bloodlust, but with a grim sense of duty. He executed hundreds of people, but he also fought tirelessly to restore his family's honor. He petitioned the emperor for decades to have the stain of his profession removed so his children could pursue other lives. His writings reveal a man deeply concerned with justice. He hated torturing people. He prided himself on his skill with the sword, not because he liked killing, but because a clean strike meant a quick, painless death for the condemned. He saw himself as a merciful end to a tragic story. But the society around him saw only the blood on his hands. He describes the loneliness, the way people crossed the street to avoid him, the burden of being the man who cuts the thread. We also see the toll in the high rates of alcoholism and suicide among executioners. Many tried to numb the reality of their lives. Others embraced the monster persona, becoming brutal and sadistic, perhaps figuring that if the world treated them like beasts, they might as well act the part. But the majority were simply men trapped in a job they didn't choose, trying to feed their families in the only way they knew how. They were prisoners of their birthright, shackled to the scaffold just as surely as the men they executed. It is also important to look at the executioner's relationship with his clients, the condemned. Surprisingly, this relationship was often intimate and complex. The executioner was the last person the prisoner would interact with. In the moments before death, on the scaffold, there was often a strange bond between them. The executioner would ask for forgiveness. "Forgive me, brother, for I must do my duty." The prisoner would often grant it. They were both actors in a tragedy scripted by the state. In some cases, the executioner acted as a counselor or a confessor when the priest was unavailable. He would offer a final drink, a steadying hand, a word of comfort. He knew better than anyone the fear of death. There are records of executioners deliberately botching torture, making it look real but inflicting less pain if they believed the victim was innocent or if they had been bribed by the family. Of course, there were also bungled executions, horrific spectacles where the axe missed or the rope broke, leading to the executioner being mobbed and sometimes killed by the angry crowd. The line between being the master of the scaffold and the victim of the mob was razor thin. This precarious existence forced the executioner to develop a thick skin, a professional detachment that bordered on dissociation. He had to separate the body from the person. He had to view the human anatomy as a mechanism to be dismantled, joints to be dislocated, necks to be severed rather than as a living, feeling being. This emotional callousness was a survival mechanism, but it further alienated him from the community. A man who can look at a weeping woman and see only a neck to be measured is a man who has lost a vital part of his humanity in the eyes of his neighbors. The era of the celebrity executioner eventually passed, but the shadows of that time linger. As we look back at the medieval executioner, we must ask ourselves difficult questions about the nature of justice and the people we task with enforcing it. We like to think that justice is clean, abstract, and noble. But ultimately, justice in the medieval world, and perhaps in any world, requires a physical act. Someone has to lock the door. Someone has to throw the switch. Someone has to swing the axe. The medieval society was honest about the violence of justice, even if it was hypocritical about the man who delivered it. They put the violence in the town square for everyone to see. But they punished the man who did it because he reminded them of the ugly reality of their own laws. He was a mirror reflecting the violence of the state, and society hated what it saw in that mirror. By ostracizing him, they could pretend that the violence had nothing to do with them. They could wash their hands of it, like Pilate. while he stood in the blood. Today, we have hidden our executioners behind prison walls, anonymous and bureaucratic. We have sanitized the process, but the dynamic remains. The burden of carrying out the state's ultimate punishment still exacts a terrible price on the human soul. The story of the Scharfrichter is a haunting reminder that there is no such thing as clean violence. The blade cuts both ways. It severs the head of the criminal, but it also severs the connection between the executioner and humanity. In the end, the most horrifying reality of being a medieval executioner was not the ghosts of the dead, it was the silence of the living. It was the realization that to serve the law was to lose one's place in the human family.